The resolution: video games glorifying gun violence should be banned. Well, first we have to ask what kind of ban are we discussing? Are we discussing a complete and total ban on even the production, which would probably severely impact our economy because Call of Duty, the new Call of Duty alone made $400 million on its first day out. That's that's a significant. There's millions of people being employed by video game companies. There are millions of people consuming the products of video game companies. It is an integral part of our modern technological economy, and it's also a multinational economy that these video games are involved in. Also, it's gun violence glorified in video games, while it is not necessarily suitable for many ages, which is clearly stated on the video games themselves, the ESRB warnings. It is up to the parents themselves who are notified of the game's violent content via these ESRB warnings on the video games. It is up to these parents to make the correct decision to whether or not to allow their children to play these video games. I don't think the problem with violence in our society is necessarily attributed to gun violence in video games or just violent video games in general. I think it's more along the lines of a culture that is violent. A culture that is violent that has created a want for these violent video games. It's not these violent video games creating a culture that wants violence. We're surrounded by constant cases of murder and civil unrest in the media, and to see this in video games, I think it's video games are more of a reflection of what we are living in, as opposed to uh, a causal factor for what kind of society we are living in. That being said, banning them would only do what the prohibition of alcohol did in the early 20th century. That is, make it far more risky to use, but also almost like a reactionary increase in the use. Being like, look at the marijuana prohibition. I've seen statistics showing that more teenagers now smoke marijuana than cigarettes, which was not the case back in the early 20th century when marijuana was not even illegal. It was hardly known. It was the legalization. It was the legal battles surrounding marijuana that has sent it to the forefront of popular culture. That being said, a ban itself would just be completely unenforceable. There are already video games out that are in people's households that have gun violence. Would we propose sending police officers armed into the houses of every youth and young adult who has a Call of Duty game to take that away from them? The logistics involved with this ban would just be outrageous and would be an extreme burden on the taxpayers who are already paying millions and billions and trillions of dollars for the wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, the war on drugs. We're already in a recession. A ban would not only hurt the technological economy, but it would also put an extra burden on taxpayers themselves, who are not necessarily opposed to these violent video games, but more or less neutral on the matter.